interested in celebrating the Sabbath and pursuing God through a Hebraic worldview of Scripture and our times. We are currently in a letting go flow in our community, and tonight we're going to look at letting go of labels. Letting go of labels. Hey, Katie, good to see you, honey. Shabbat Shalom. So if you feel comfortable during this process of popping up a label in the comments of maybe what you've either given yourself or what someone has given to you or what you feel like society has put on you, feel free to share that. When Nathanael was told about Yeshua of Nazareth, we read in John 1:46, he responded, "What good can come from Nazareth?" So even Jesus had a label, and that label was nothing good came from where you did. Why do humans label? We use labeling to manage the complexities of our environments, for the purpose of keeping us safe, and even to conserve our energy sometimes, to not throw seed pearls at the feet of swine, right? But also, humans can use labels because we're lazy. We can label ourselves out of laziness, so no one puts any expectations on us. Or we can label others very quickly and make judgments about that so we don't have to take the time to understand them. And we label because we want to feel like we have control. So labeling gives us the illusion that we have control because we think we know where everything and everyone fits in, right? By the way, if this is hitting it, give me a thumbs up. Hey, Jules, good to see you, honey. Shabbat Shalom, great to see you. Hey, Phoebes, good to have you with us. So, again, we know where everything fits, so it's a sense of control. There is a phrase in psychology called labeling theory, which is how your identity and behavior is influenced by the labels you use to describe or classify yourself, as well as how others can affect that. So years ago, for about four years, I knew a young boy who was probably the happiest, helpful, positive little man there was. He would always be early when we drove up in the church bus to pick him up for Saturday Sunday school. And not only did he get his two sisters down all the steps on the apartment and onto the street on time, he'd rally all of his neighbors to get them down so they could get into the bus as well. And then he'd help them back to their apartment. So sometimes the kids won prizes. If they won prizes, he would help them with the prize. He was a leader, he was a caregiver, and he was a facilitator. Then, when he was in about the 6th grade, he was labeled with a learning disorder. That was the label they gave him. And he was put in a class with children with all kinds of really profound issues. And that label changed the trajectory of this little boy. He came and told me right after it happened, I got taken out of my class because I'm dumb and too stupid to learn. And then he went on and said, I have to be with these kids. And he called the kids the same names he heard other kids call. I don't even want to say what the names are, but he called the kids that he was in the class with names. From then on, instead of being his normal, positive, problem-solving self, when I would ask him things like to help me, he would just shrug his shoulders all the way up to his ears and say, don't know. His own mother actually even started to treat him differently. And one memory that really sticks with me is she had a bunch of bags. She was coming from the bodega. She had a bunch of bags. They were unevenly packed. And so they kind of spilled all over onto the street. And before this time, his mother used to always call this little boy my little fixer. And so I noticed that all these bags spilled all over the street, and he instinctively went in to do what he does, which is repack the bags so that they would be more balanced. And she pushed him away and said, no, I'll do it. She never would have done that before. labeling has serious consequences. There are an ancient group of descendants of the indigenous people of North Africa, and they are known as Berbers. And they don't like to be called Berbers because that name is related to the word barbarians. They prefer to be called Amazigh, which means free people. Now, hear me. People, as individuals, as smaller groups, or as larger groups, can call themselves whatever they want to. Those who are lazy or who want to remain in control resist those label changes. And you hear these kinds of people saying things like, oh, I forget, what are we supposed to be calling them now? Oh, you forgot? How about I forgot that I'm not supposed to put these hands on you? No, I'm just kidding. I don't actually put my hands on people, okay? Hardly at all. But here's the thing. Not all labeling is bad. Oftentimes when people find out that they are dyslexic or have a gluten intolerance, it's like they finally understand what's been going on with them. And this thing that has been very confusing and problematic is actually this label is helping them, not limiting them, because now they understand it and they can move to freedom. We can also label ourselves in ways that gives a message to our neighbors or our communities. When I was younger, again, child of the 60s, what we did and all my friends did was constantly wear the peace sign somewhere. We had it as jewelry, we had it as a necklace, we had it on a shirt or on a jacket or stitch. We did a lot of stitching on our jeans or whatever. And what that peace sign meant was we were against what this country was doing in Vietnam. It also may have meant that there was weed involved, and possibly hallucinogenics, but that's a different story. Basically, the peace sign identified anyone who wore it with an anti-war sentiment. Hey, Rebecca, good to see you. I agree that, let me just labels give me a way to understand myself, right? Right. So not all the time are labels bad. In my neighborhood in Florida, and I live in a place called Seminole Heights, which is in Tampa, we have our neighbors, a lot of them have signs in their yards because people, they want to let their neighbors or anyone that walks by or drives by know where they stand. So they have signs with BLM signs or Love is Love signs or all different kinds of signs people have in their front yard. One challenge, however, with labeling as a group and identifying as a group is we become identified with the labels that other people have put on that group that may not apply to us personally. Okay? Have you felt that? Have you experienced that? If we take a group labeled athletes or artists or billionaires or tech nerds or environmentalists or pro-lifers, what we do is we sort of ascribe to these labels all these other dynamics that may or may not be with people that identify with that group as individuals, because they're all different, right? In 1930, linguist Benjamin Whorf came up with the term linguistic relativity hypothesis. Linguistic relativity hypothesis. It means that the words we use not only describe what we see, but determine what we see. That's huge. The words we use not only describe what we see, but they determine what we see. The labels we use determine how we view people. Now, we know the phrase, we believe what we see, but it's more really like, and you've heard me say this before, we see what we believe. But I want to take it the next step, and labels can shape that belief. So we see what we believe, and labels can shape that belief. Now, let me give you an example of this. When I first moved to Florida, I started to look for some raw goat milk. And I was looking up dairy farmers in my area, and I found one. And he was an older guy. He had really great reviews. And so I drove to the farm, and I come to the farm, and at the very entrance of the farm, there was a huge Confederate flag. Now, I don't know if you've ever driven in Florida, but when people put up flags, they don't use any normal size flag. You're talking about like a 3-story flag, okay? Floridians love their big flags. So there was a huge Confederate flag right at the entrance, the driveway of this farm. So I drove in, I saw the flag, I put it in reverse, I back up, I drive home. I find another farm, a little bit farther drive, but it did not have a Confederate flag in the driveway. So then a few months, again, labels, right? So a few months later, I saw this thing about local farmers on Facebook, and it was a little documentary that they did on YouTube that people did about local farmers on YouTube, and he was one of them. And I was watching it because my farmers were on there. He was one of them. And he started talking about how long he's been a farmer, and he started talking about how he gives dairy to the local school, and his local school was actually almost all young children of color. He didn't say that, but I know the area. And he also brought his animals to the schools all the time to do teaching about the animals. And then he brings up the Confederate flag because it was in the shot of his farm. And he said, you know, a lot of people misunderstand the Confederate flag's meaning. To me, it has to do with my Southern family history and the fact that I've been on this land for 80 years. So I make a note to myself that I was going to visit him because my label just outright said this dude is a racist because he has a giant Confederate flag. He hates all people of color and he is a white supremacist racist. Okay, that was my label with that Confederate flag. Now I realize that he's not alone with thinking like this, that he doesn't have the same connotations about this flag, so therefore, whatever it means to him is what it means. So I think, okay, well, maybe I should take a drive out to his farm and have a little discussion. Because it doesn't seem like he's 1,000% a bad guy. He's giving away a lot of food and he's doing education with kids and all. Maybe I could enlighten him as to if it's an offense to a group of people, we need to take that into consideration, right? I would love to tell you that happened, but unfortunately, the end of this story is not that way. He actually died before I could go there. But I say all that to say that this would be a perfect example of me making an assessment because of his symbol. I labeled him and I pulled away. Now, I don't regret pulling away and not going in because most oftentimes that would have been a waste of my time. But what did give me some more information was being open to who he was when I saw him on this television show. Okay? Are you with me on that? So again, Stephanie's saying so true. So again, we have to realize that labels sometimes, okay, we can identify all the people in the group as the same, and it's not always the case. So let's look at the words of Yeshua in Luke 6:45. The good person produces good things from the store of good in his heart, while the evil person produces evil things from the store of evil in his heart. For his mouth speaks what overflows from his heart. So this is an important reminder. The mouth speaks the words which are the thoughts of the heart, which is why we need to be very careful with labeling. The words that we speak create. They produce. Words are things. They have the power of life and death in them. So are labels really that serious? Here's a really interesting quote by one of my favorite rabbis, Rabbi Abraham Heschel, who you've all heard me talk about many a time. He says, good and evil are not values among other values. Good is life and evil is death. This is deep, so let's read it one more time. Good and evil are not values among other values. Good is life and evil is death. So he wants for us to look at things here in a little bit of a different way than what we normally do. He posits if we think of eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, as one set of values, and the commandment that God gives for Adam and Hava to not eat of it as another set of values, we will have missed the message in the story. The eating of the tree is not one way of life, serving self, versus another way of life, serving God. What he suggests is eating of the tree is death. It might look like it is living, but that is the deception of existence apart from the relationship with God. The seduction of the tree is that it gives a different kind of life. But the actual choice is life or death. Really that clear, life or death. The tree gives death. Labels, even self-given labels, can be life and they can be death, literally. So this is kind of a serious topic. And we have to relate to them with that level of seriousness. Even at the least, negative labels, when we connect to them, when we define ourselves by them, can prevent us or hinder us. For example, if you say, oh no, I'm not the kind of person that can do that, as an explanation of why you aren't trying to do something, this is a limiting label. Your connection with the label will make sure that you cannot do it, okay? We tend to want to really label our children very quickly and publicly, right? Parents do this publicly. Ever see at family gatherings maybe where everyone calls the child a label? I remember when I would go to other families' gatherings and they would tell a little girl, oh, what do you always act like a boy for? You're a tomboy. You act like a boy all the time. Or they label a child with a hot temper. They call him, oh, he has a hot temper. And then when a tantrum happens, everybody laughs and calls him that label. As children, we can receive those negative labels, like you're a quitter, because maybe you have the kind of attention span that it does not allow you to be focused on one thing for a prolonged period of time. Instead, maybe a child works on 3 different things at the same time, bouncing all around, and completes all of the projects, all 3 projects, or all 2 projects, and gets praised for completing the project. It's a different label, you understand? In the time of Yeshua, the trajectory of the narrative was spiraling into division. And this led to dualistic thinking, hate-filled oppression, fearful xenophobia, othering, as we've been saying, religious nationalism, and cyclical, perpetual conflicts. This was all labeling in the time of Yeshua. So Yeshua, with the inclusion of tax collectors and women who were forced to sell themselves to survive, and the telling of parables with the Good Samaritan as the hero, all of this challenged the validity of the meaning of those labels. This is why Yeshua did this, among other things. So we need to be very careful with our labeling of others, the labels we put on ourselves or allow others to put on us. Poet Anais Nin says, we don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. And when we use labels, we can fall into becoming lazy perceivers. So let me ask you this. In this recent time that we're all in, and in this past 4 years, and then especially in this past year and a half, did you find yourself really quick to give a situation, a person, a thing, a label? Because you needed to define it. You had to define it. You had a passion to define good and evil, right? To keep you safe. Because we were all on high alert. We've been talking through this. When we're on high alert, when we're in flight or fight, we do this very quickly. Did you find yourself really, really defaulting to labels and what they meant, or giving people labels, or even allowing yourself to be labeled? With our own self-labeling, one good way, and this is a really kind of interesting thing, because again, we can get lazy with this. And Stephanie's saying, yes, you mean like now. Exactly. Exactly, Stephanie. Very much like now, right? This is what's going on a lot. Again, we can become lazy perceivers. So with our own self-labeling, how many people feel like they do that? Let me see you, your thumbs up. If you've given yourself labels. One good way, or if you've connected to labels that other people have given you, and you realize that it's kind of part of your identity now. One good way of discovering our labels is by noticing when we use the word because. This is really simple and really telling, okay? So if I ask you, Julie, let me just see what Julie wrote. Julie says, I definitely looked out for the labels to see if someone was safe to be around. Right, exactly. Which is what we do. It's a way of self-protecting. There's no question about it. And we all kind of get why that is, especially in this time. And we conserve energy in that way. And in some ways, that's absolutely fine. Okay, I'm not saying all labels are wrong. I'm just saying that there's some real dangerous areas in them. So with our own self-labeling, if we notice when we use the word because. So think of, you can do this later after tonight, write down 3 things that are not working in your life. 3 things that are not working in your life, okay? Now they could be your food habits, your alcohol habits, your relationships, your meditation habit, it could be anything. It could be anything in your life. 3 things that are not working for you. Write them down first. And then after you write them down, you're going to say, why are these things happening or not happening? And your because will tell you your label. And it's going to go something like, well, because I. Okay? And where that sentence takes you is what label you have either given yourself or allowed to be pinned on you. Okay? Mary says, I get labeled because I haven't decided to get the vaccine yet, like anti-vaxxers or far-rightists. That's a great example, Mary. And I was just talking to someone today about this, and I'm also talking to someone about this as well who has a health issue. And she had to make a choice between a treatment of her health issue and the vaccine. She's a woman of color, so she had a great deal of skepticism even about trusting that the vaccine could be safe or possibly safe, right? Obviously, because of the history. And so even apart from that, she had to choose between a treatment and choose between getting a vaccine. And now she has to go back to work. And she works with kids, and they're saying the kids don't have to wear masks. And her staff isn't wearing masks because they're all vaccinated. She's not vaccinated. And she's having to navigate this because now everyone's saying, oh, you're this. Again, this is a perfect example, Mary, of how we do this and how we really cannot do this. Because even though there are totally some people who are QAnon people, okay, there's a lot of people with a lot of issues about getting the vaccine, and because they are waiting or because they are choosing not to, that doesn't mean they're those people. It just means they have their own opinions and ideas. So that's a perfect example. So when you say these three things aren't working for me, and then you say, why not? Well, because I, and as you write, well, because I, you're going to connect to your labels. Now, personally in my life, I'm going to give you an example of this. I have absolutely stayed too long in organizations or involved with people. I have stayed longer than what I should have. And the staying too long hurt me in all kinds of different ways. And why was that? So I could do it like this. I'm going to say I stayed too long in a certain relationship or with a certain organization or in a certain place or whatever it is. I stayed because and I'm going to fill that in and tell you my junk, because I'm loyal. Okay? Now that's a label that I gave myself. I stayed too long in relationships or with organizations or whatever it is, and I hurt myself. Even though I knew I should have bounced, I hurt myself because I'm loyal. That's my label. Now, I connected to that label that I gave myself when I was very young and in grade school. When I noticed the kind of fickleness of kids at school, right? How they're your best friends and then they hate you and they make fun of you because whatever the cool kids say, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I was young. I was like third grade maybe. And I noticed how cruel that is and how the kids on the outskirts were just devastated, and I hated it because of the hurt it caused. So I said and I kind of gravitated towards loyalty as a value because of that. Because a lack of loyalty is very hurtful. So I really gravitated towards loyalty as a value. And it's valuable. And then I defined myself as loyal, and I lived my whole life out of being a loyal person. I define myself as a loyal person. Okay? It's a good trait, but it shouldn't be a standalone label or virtue with no other labels like acceptance of reality or self-care, right? And apart from that, that's my label. Apart from that, also, your labels can change over your life, and they should change over your life, especially as you age. So when I was younger and in my 30s, and I was a pastor in my 30s, I was called sweet a lot. People would bring their friends into the church and introduce me. Oh, meet my sweet Pastor Donna. She's so sweet. That's how I was known in my 30s. Not so much now. Not so much. I can't even remember the last time somebody called me sweet. Now they call me kind. That's great, but not sweet. So again, this sort of changes. These labels change as you get older. So again, as we ask ourselves these questions, we're going to say, this isn't working for me because, and then you're going to examine what those labels are. Maybe you got them from somewhere else. Maybe you got them from your own heart like I did. Whatever it is, you're going to uncover those labels and question if they're still working for you, if they're the foundation of why you are or aren't living in health. Does that make sense? Give me a thumbs up if that's making sense. So, question. Do you remember who you were before people told you who you should be? Do you remember who you were before people told you who you should be? And here's the really cool thing about this. Each one of us is a spiritual idea of the Lord. Genesis 1:26 says, "Then God said, let us make humankind in our image, in the likeness of ourselves." This is God saying this about us. Wow. To be defined like this is a label that God, our Creator, gives us. In the image, in the likeness of Him. To be defined like this, not by my family, my body, my nationality, my age, my gender, my genes, my job, my relationships. What does this look like to me? What does being created in the image? And remember, we talked about this before. That's the Hebrew word tselem, which means the shadow. So when light shines in between something, it casts the exact form on the ground. That's the word, shadow. We're in the exact likeness of God. What does this look like in me? How do I make decisions out of that? To think of ourselves as the divine expression. And this will free us from the limitations that labels might impose. You are Yahweh's own expression of Himself. You can call yourself Tselem, T-S-E-L-E-M, or Shadow if you'd like. Of course, that reminds me of the dog movie that we watched with the kids when they were little boys, so it's a beautiful name, Shadow. So we're going to close this time with the lighting of the Shabbos candles. And traditionally, the mothers of the home light the Sabbath candles, which represent peace, love, joy, unity. And then she encircles the candles 3 times with her hands, which is a gesture of welcoming in the Sabbath. And then she prays. The Lord is our light and our salvation. May His light be felt in this space as the enlightenment of truth and the radiance of joy. Amen. So I just wanted to let you know, and I'll be posting this as well. Next week, we're going to take a week off because I'm going to be in New Jersey visiting my sisters. So we're not going to get together next week, but then we'll pick up again the week after. So as you discover these labels, let's see how that compares to being the image, the shadow, the tselem of God. Shabbat Shalom.